Hello, vinyl community. This is David Bianco. Today we're going to be doing a vinyl shootout between an original copy from 1981 on Columbia Records of Bill Withers' Greatest Hits. We'll be comparing that to the 2016 Mobile Fidelity or Mofi release of the same album. That's coming up next here on the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. So, with this vinyl shootout, let's talk a bit about the album and some idiosyncrasies about what we're going to be experiencing with the Greatest Hits album, because Greatest Hits albums are taking songs from various other releases. And that means that across a catalog of different albums that are made by an artist, those albums are made over time. There are different recording methods, different engineers, and things that occur during the process that then when you bring these songs and pluck them off of the variety of albums, you have a little bit of difference in maybe the quality of the tracks, and definitely in some of the tape methods that were used when these were recorded in the 70s and the very, very early 80s. So in this case, we do have that situation. We have an original here of the Columbia release from 1981, which obviously that cut of the record is going to have the freshest tapes available at the time. So originals always have that leg up or that advantage. Least amount of wear, freshest tape. But there are other factors there. Maybe the equipment isn't quite as good as something maybe that has been made subsequently to read those tapes. So there's a variety of things that can happen. But we know one thing. We have a 1981 original Columbia here that I'm using to compare to this 2016 remastering by Mobile Fidelity. And so the Mobile Fidelity in this case is one that does have the digital DSD steps in them, whereby they actually took an analog tape and then copied it to DSD. And then that DSD file is what was used to go to analog, to go to the lathe, to cut the lacquer, which then was used to press the records. Now, all of the tracks on here, all 10, were sourced with a 1/4 inch 15 IPS or inch per second tape. And they all had a variety, though, of processing back then. Some had Dolby involved, some did not. Dolby A was used on about half of these tracks, whereby when those were recorded, Dolby A was the in thing, and that was used. And it does have an effect on the sound somewhat, but it would have had an effect back then as well, because that's the way the original source was in fact recorded. So the Mofi is one that was put through the DSD step. And so when I first are going to make comparisons between albums, the first thing I do is start side A and listen to it quickly at the beginning to determine and A/B the two to get a meter reading to see is one, quote, louder than the other. And in this case, the Mofi was about 2 dB louder. So when I make the comparisons, then I have to create a volume level on the Mofi that's 2 dB less to basically get a equal footing of the sound pressure level of the way it's going to sound, because the Mofi is going to sound louder and potentially more appealing because of that, or potentially less appealing depending on a person's listening style and what they really like. But it is a way to get them on a firm, fair playing field. So 2 dB difference there, so you get that right out of the gate, making that adjustment, then starting to compare the actual songs one by one. and some characteristics that were a little more obvious. The Mofi definitely had more capability as it related to soundstage and to the imaging of the placement of instruments. There are definitely some very strong percussive type elements in the songs on this album, and those really had more of a nature that I could pick them out more easily, and they were more staged in a way that I could, if I close my eyes, I could almost have an image of the person hitting them. The OG, they were present, but they weren't quite as delineated or quite as separate and distinct as they were in the Mofi. There were tracks that had rhythm guitars going along with it, just the two of us being one that really stood out, where that guitar really came out a little more, and you could hear the notes and the rhythm of what was being played, where I had to kind of listen for it more on the original. So you see what happens when you do these comparisons is you hear what is, let's say, on the OG originally, and then you play the Mofi in this case, and then all of a sudden certain things, you say, oh, I don't remember hearing that quite as distinctly. So you make notes and you start to go back and forth a bit and make these comparisons. And in doing that, you kind of get an idea of why these particular instruments sound different. Well, they sound different in that they have different placement in the image, and they have different contact. In other words, you can actually feel the beat of maybe a congo or something like that, or the hit of a cymbal with the actual drumstick in cases. So this is where you start to recognize that certain things are maybe a little muffled in the OG. It sounds good, but again, until you have something to compare it to, you can't necessarily know what the difference is. But I would say overall, on a track-to-track basis across the board, I definitely gained more feeling out of the musicality of what was coming out of the Mofi versus the OG. And the OG sounded great and sounded good on its own. I've been listening to the OG for about 4 weeks. I actually picked it up at a place in Huntsville, Alabama called Blue Moon Records. If you're ever in Huntsville, it's north of Birmingham. A really nice guy named Neil Watts runs this store, and I picked that up there, and then I got the Mofi here very recently to compare to. So I already had a fairly good impression of the OG, and that it sounded pretty good actually for its age and for the pressing that it was. But again, when you have something to compare it to, then you start to see maybe some of the areas where you didn't quite pick up on some of the nuances that were really in the recording but hadn't come out. So these extra processes that are done and did in fact bring that out. The age of the tape I don't think was as much of an issue, because when I looked, they haven't really issued this album a lot and reissued it and reissued where they maybe have worn the tape and banged the tape a lot. And that is a factor when you're doing this. So for me overall, the question always is, all right, so I have a $40 Mofi and about a $20 OG. Does the Mofi sound twice as good? Well, does it sound $20 better is another way to put it. Which one would I keep, and which one would I say, I could do without that? Well, I think for me, I would keep the Mofi because it has just a better sound that's more pleasing to my ears, and I get some of those extra musical images and stereo separation and basic feel that I receive when I listen to it, which is just a bit stronger and is worth it for the kind of songs that they have. Bill's voice is a little more clear, like Lean on Me. You know, that's a really classic song. It's very much about the vocals, of course, in that. And so, you know, these songs just kind of stand out a little more and have a little more feeling to them than on the OG. And again, the OG is good, but it's not something you're going to pick up for $7. You know, it's going for $20 or so in decent shape these days. So some of these decisions are not quite as cut and dried as they used to be, where you could just say you throw a couple bucks at it and get the album. Now, you have to like the music enough to want to spend $40 on a record. That's always the case. So again, these are all personal decisions we have to make. These are all things with our ears we have to come to judgment with. I mean, my system, I have a dual 1245 turntable and an Accutex 310E elliptical cartridge. I have an NAD 3140 integrated amplifier with the phono stage in it. And I have RTA 11 Polk audio tower speakers. So it's not like I have an uber expensive, high-end, tens of thousands of dollars system at all. And even with mine, I can tell the differences between these particular records and make a judgment on that. So it's always up to the listener. What do you want to spend your money on? I would say that you can't go wrong with the Mofi. If you have doubt about the Mofi because of the DSD or whatever, I mean, to me, it's all a matter of how it sounds. And regardless of the methods that are used, how does it sound to my ears? And I would say that the Mofi on the Bill Withers Greatest Hits was pleasing to my ears, and it was something that I'm glad I bought and I would keep, and I think that it's worthy of your consideration. So that's the Shootout for today. Thanks for watching the channel. Of course, if you haven't subscribed, I would appreciate if you consider doing that by clicking the subscribe button and the black bell to get all notifications. If you, in fact, liked the video, if you'd hit the thumbs up, I'd appreciate it. And any comments you have or questions, always welcome here. So for now, I say thanks for joining me as always, and we'll see you next time around at the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Take care, everybody.